Okay, welcome to today's discussion on what is the Gilded Age and the Pendulum. Okay, so first of all, the Gilded Age refers to a time period in American history from 1865 to 19. It's debatable. Here you can see that historians often differ as to when that ending date is. When it should be. 1896, others place it around 1900, others 1901. I like to use the year 1901. 1901 is the beginning of the Progressive Era, the beginning of the presidency of Teddy Roosevelt. But the Gilded Age, we study in APUSH. The Gilded Age is a time period of tremendous change, growth, transformation, metamorphosis. Okay, you can see the various components. This graphic organizer really highlights the various components of the Gilded Age. We've got it's got different factors. You got the it is in many ways the second industrial revolution. It's a time period in which there is a large scale success of the United States economy. Essentially the industrial revolution that begins before the Civil War doesn't really stop. The second industrial revolution is the revolution that occurs after the Civil War, and it's been accelerated. The growth has been accelerated, and in response to the growth and the success and the prosperity, the generation of wealth during the second industrial revolution, we see the formation of labor unions. So the Gilded Age has a economic component to it, and in APUSH we will take the Gilded Age and divide it into a number of units. We will have a industrialization unit in which we will study the factors that enable the United States economy to take off during the Gilded Age time period. The labor union response to the Industrial Revolution. Okay, it also has a political component, and we will actually have a separate unit in which we address the politics, the Gilded Age politics unit, analyzing what the major political issues were during the age, and of course one of the big political developments of the Gilded Age period is the emergence of the populist movement, and that we actually will treat this as a separate unit. The 1890s, okay, the populism of the 1890s, and of course we will study the about the high level of corruption that we find in American government during the period, because that's really what helps define American government during the Gilded Age. And then of course we have the social developments of the Gilded Age. We included with the Gilded Age, it'll be a study of immigration, where we have the second wave of immigrants that enter the United States. The first wave will enter the United States before the Civil War. Those are your old immigrants. And the wave that enters the United States after the Civil War, they were called the new immigrants. And so we will study the differences between those. Then we'll see we'll learn about the story of the emerging progressive movement that we really begin to see coalesce in the late 1800s and throughout the 1890s, leading to the Progressive Era. And as the United States becomes industrial, we too become urban. So the Gilded Age is a time period of change and transformation where the United States is moving away from agriculture towards industry, in which we're becoming less of a rural country and more of a urban country. And as we become an urban nation, what changes does that bring on? And of course, finally, we will study Gilded Age culture, in dealing with art, literature, and technological advances that changed how people lived, worked, and played. But really, in answering the initial question, what is the Gilded Age? The Gilded Age, let me go back. The Gilded Age also includes 2 units, okay, that we've studied. The first one is the New West, and by now we should have the DQs completed for the New West. We are done for the New West. B-Day will have their New West quiz on Thursday, and of course the second unit that also incorporates this topic is the New South, and you should also be completed with the DQs of the New South by this moment. Okay, so the Gilded Age can be told really either one of 2 ways. It is a story of success. The United States today has arguably one of the most successful democratic and capitalistic societies in the world. The few years back, the global economy was worth $60 trillion, and the United States represented 60% of that. The United States is very rich. We're very wealthy. Americans enjoy a very high standard of living. And so what the story of the United States is the story of the success of the U.S. economy. And really during the Gilded Age is where we really see the U.S. economy take off. Those of you who have taken, or maybe you're taking right now, or maybe you're going to take it your senior year, but in AP Human Geography, students actually study, the process of industrialization, and I believe it's called Rostow's 5 stages of economic development. And in Rostow's model, he says that essentially countries go through 5 stages of development, and during the industrial stage, we have a period called takeoff, and during takeoff, that's where you really see the economy grow, 7 to 10% each quarter. They see their GDP grow at a rate of 7 to 10%. What China and India is going through today, the United States went through during the Gilded Age. Okay, so the United States becomes very rich, very wealthy, very, very successful. During the Gilded Age, we're going to see the creation of a whole class of millionaires, and they are going to drive the United States economy forward. By 1900, the United States it's not only the richest country in the world, but if you add second place and third place, Great Britain and Germany, if you add those 2 countries together, they still do not equal the net worth of the United States in 1900. So the Gilded Age is a story of success. It's a story of rags to riches, it's a story of Andrew Carnegie and J.P. Morgan and John D. Rockefeller and other successful businessmen who take the United States economy and they move it into a new level. They take it to a new level. And today, Americans enjoy a very high standard of living. We live better than most people around the world. In fact, the people in the United States who live in poverty have social systems and safety nets and welfare programs to take care of them. You go around the world today, you'll find that many living in poverty live in countries where safety nets aren't available. So even as rich as our country is, I think you measure the greatness of a country, you measure the greatness of an economy by how you treat your poor. And the United States does a very, of course, there's a lot more we can do, but the United States, on average, does more for its underclasses than any country in the world. And so look at the Gilded Age as a story of success, in which the United States is going through a lot of change. From, we're becoming an urban dwelling country. We're becoming even more of a melting pot. And we like to think that immigration is especially in my class, we like to look at immigration as a strength, not a detriment. Immigration, we're a nation of immigrants. We are a melting pot. And immigrants have made this country wonderful and have enabled our country to grow and be excellent. But it's the immigrants basically are going to experience the same type of treatment that they experienced before the Civil War, but a little bit worse. But at the end of the day, what you're looking at is a time period in which the United States is really becoming more of a modern society, modernity. And I think that's a key word for you guys to use, is the United States is moving into a new age of development. And as it does, as it enters a new age of development, you have with it what I like to call growing pains. Out of success, because the country was growing so rapidly and there was so much change, the country will experience growing pains. Okay, and so that gets into the other aspect of the Gilded Age. It's a story of success, but it's also a story of greed, corruption, inequality, exploitation, sorry guys, and it's a time period in which we see the creation of victims. If we're going to be victims, and there's nowhere where we see a better example of these attributes right here, these characteristics, than in our novel, The Jungle. Big reason why I want you guys to read that book, why we are reading the book, is because The Jungle actually addresses a lot of these adjectives, okay? A lot of these terms. And so it's a period, yes, it's a period of success. It's a period where the United States is becoming a more modern society. It's going through a lot of rapid changes. And, there are a lot of rags to riches stories, but it's also a story of greed, corruption, inequality, exploitation in 3 areas: in American business. And of course, we're going to learn about the monopolies and their abuse of workers, abuse of consumers, the various abuses that take place, corruption in business, government, and in society in general. Okay, that as the United States experiences change, growth, and wealth and prosperity, okay, it also breeds victims. It creates people are motivated by greed, and greed is one of those 7 deadly sins. It's that on the way up the economic ladder, Americans will step on people, and they will victimize people, and they will exploit people. I mean, just look at the first Gilded Age unit we've studied, the New West. Okay, Now, when we studied the New West, I made it very clear that when we study the New West, we want to look at it two ways. We want to see the New West as a story of success. It's a triumphant story. It's a great story the development of the New West, the building of the railroads, the development of the three frontiers, the mining, ranching, and farming frontier, that the development of the West was very, very important for the eventual development of the entire country. But that everything great that came out of it is kind of tempered down by the tragedy of the New West, the decimation of the buffalo, the destruction of Native American culture, the degradation of the environment and the land out west. That ultimately, the New West is really a perfect Gilded Age unit, because you could tell the story. It's got two stories. That makes you feel kind of warm inside, and then it's got an aspect to it that makes your stomach turn. So you're going to find that with each of these Gilded Age units, that you're going to find two stories, and I think it's important that we study both stories. So like the antebellum period, before the Civil War, in APUSH, we actually took the antebellum and we divided it into different units. We had a Renaissance and American Renaissance. We had a unit on all the different reform movements. We had a unit on the Second Great Awakening, a Manifest Destiny unit. We had a unit on the Market Revolution. Well, we're going to do the same in the Gilded Age. We're going to take this time period and we're going to divide it into smaller sub-units. Industrialization, urbanization, the New West, the New South, the Populists. All right, we're going to have a unit on, and of course, immigration. The story of immigration will be told in the urbanization unit. Okay, in the urbanization unit. So we're going to basically take this and we're going to divide it into smaller units. But just understand that each of these units can be told one of two ways. It's got its good and it's got its bad. Okay, but ultimately it's got a lot of bad. It's got a lot of bad. Okay, so that is the Gilded Age. Now, what I like to do is I like to, before we start the Gilded Age in earnest, I like to introduce to you something that I learned from a professor of history in Sam Houston State University many years ago, a guy by the name of Terry Billhartz. Unfortunately, he's deceased. Great guy, great historian. And I went to a Teaching American History Academy. It's probably 18 years ago. Can't believe it's been that long, but where I spent about 3 weeks up there. And he introduced this concept called the pendulum. And the pendulum is, and once he taught it, I was like, man, this is going to be a great way for students of American history to really kind of see the second half of American history, from the Civil War on, from the Gilded Age on. And what I did is I took a photo of the pendulum and I sent you a copy of it on the on Remind 101. Okay, so on Remind 101, you have a copy of that. So as you go through the rest of this YouTube, make sure you go through. Make sure you have that in front of you, because we're gonna go through that together. Okay, we're gonna go through that together. Now let me move to. Right. We want to go to right here. Now, so one thing we want to look at is this is a good point to address this topic before we move any further with the history, is we want to do kind of a political science 101 as to what is the meaning of liberal versus conservative. And so if you go to the Gilded Age politics, if you go to the Gilded Age politics page, you'll come down here to the bottom. It's got the liberal versus conservative graphic, and you will get this right here. Okay, you'll get this right here. And so essentially, according to political scientists, people are wired politically, differently. I think political scientists, essentially what they've done is they have created a, let me go here. They've created what's called a political spectrum, okay? Whoops, let's go back. They've created a political spectrum, which is basically a line. Okay, you draw this line. Looks like this. Okay. And essentially we have we've got the center here. And then you have right to center. And you have left of center. Okay. And so accordingly, political scientists say that all individuals are somewhere on this spectrum. And to the right of center are your conservatives. Okay, so this is the right wing. The right wing of the spectrum is the conservative wing. And left of center, this is the progressive wing, or the liberal, the left. Okay, so if you are described as a left winger or a leftist, this is what it comes from. Now, this actually, the whole political spectrum actually traces its roots to the French Revolution. Before the French Revolution, prior to the outbreak of violence, the king held a meeting in which he was going to discuss the ills, what was ill, the ills of France. And so they had this meeting. They met in this giant room, and they had this long table. The king sat right there at the center, and sitting to his right were his nobles. And of course, the message from the nobles was, oh, status quo, man. We don't want to change. We want to keep, sitting to his left. This is the third estate, the bourgeoisie. And these are the people who want to change. These are the folks that want to change. And so that's where the origin of the political spectrum comes from. Now, if you plot yourself on a line, obviously the further right you go, the more radical you are. Okay, so the closer you are to the center, the more moderate you are. So we use the term moderate. Moderate is someone who is right in the middle, or you might have conservative attributes and you may have some progressive attributes. But the further right you go, okay, you get to the extreme, and extreme right wing, this is where you find your fascists. Okay, fascism. Whoops, fascism, I misspelled that. Sorry guys, it's hard to write. So you got your fascism over here, and over here you have, when you go all the way, the ultra left, these are your commies. These are your communists. Okay? All right, so over here, a form of fascism, we're like the Nazis. Okay? Fascism is basically, and over here is like the Chairman Mao and Joseph Stalin and Fidel Castro, and so basically what you have on both ends of the spectrum. You got some pretty bad folks. The further you move away from the center, no matter which direction you go, the further you move from the center, you're moving towards tyranny. You're moving towards totalitarianism. I'm not going to write all that out. Totalitarianism, right? Yeah, why not? So no matter how, so whether you go left or you go right and you take it to the extreme, you're going to end up in the same place. Okay, you're going to end up in the same place. You go to a communist nation, you go to a fascist regime, and it's going to look similar to you. And so, in some ways. So this is what it is. So we've got this this political spectrum, and today you may find yourself right here, and as you go through life and you experience things and you become more educated, you're going to change. So you at the age of 17, this may be you, okay? But by the time you become my age, say, 44, 45, you may find yourself here. What moved you? What caused you to move down that spectrum? And really what causes that movement? It's called life. It's called life. Life experiences. Becoming a father, becoming a taxpayer, going to college, experiencing tragedy. There's different things that happen in our lives that as we live it, it changes how we feel about, economic, political, and social issues. You may find yourself here at 17, all right? But by the time you're 24, you've moved over here. Well, what happened between 17 and 24 to move you from one side of the spectrum to the other? And the answer is life. Life happens. You experience things. You have people that come into your lives that influence you, and so the way the political spectrum works is that it's static. I mean, it's always moving. And if you're the same person at 17, if you're the same person at 24 than you are at 17 and you don't move at all, it's usually probably because you didn't experience life, or you're very closed-minded. You're very closed-minded. You don't accept new ideas, new things, and you don't let life transform you. And so one thing I want to teach my students is that there's a value to allowing yourself to take in new ideas and to change and to adapt. And so actually, people who go their whole lives and they don't ever move, they're the same person at 84 than they were at 17. I really feel sorry for them. I really do. That means they really didn't allow the events in their lives and their education to transform the way they think, And so, but that is the political spectrum. Now let's go back to, first of all, I got to erase this. Let's go back to that image. Again, you could look at it at home. It's on the Google. It's on my Google site under political Gilded Age politics down at the very bottom. But you could take a look at that as we go through it. But what do the words conservative and liberal? What do the words conservative and progressive? What do those words mean? Now, I think when you watch CNN and Fox News and you look at social media, they'll give you a meaning as to what these words mean. But we want to look at it from an academic point of view, an academic sense. We want to get kind of a basic understanding as to what do these mean. And first of all, it is one thing I don't want to do, and I'm guilty sometimes, but we want to refrain from saying that Republicans are conservative, because we actually have conservative Democrats, and we actually have liberal Republicans. Okay, we don't have as many of these groups as we used to, but but we um, we use these terms: left, right, conservative, liberal, traditional versus progressive. Let's refrain from using the word Republican to mean conservative. Now, are most Republicans conservative? Sure. Are most Democrats liberal? Yes. But there are exceptions to this. There's definitely exceptions to this. So let's look at this. I think this is such a great diagram as to who they are. I also want to address this before we go over this. First of all, these folks and these folks are very important. You're not going to find me placing any bias over this. The fact is, in order for our system of government to work, in order for democracy to work, we have to have a two-party system that balance each other out. When you have one-party rule, or when you have one philosophy that rules a government, then that leads to tyranny, and that leads to abuse. Government tends to abuse its powers when we have that. I'm going to tell you that even though you may label yourself a progressive, I want you to understand that these people over here are very important. They offer things. They offer a philosophy that is valuable to society. And if you're a conservative, these people over here are very important, and they have something to offer that's very valuable to society. So let's just kind of look at what the left and what the right means, and then we'll look at the pendulum and put it all together. So over here on the right, of course, the word conservative means status quo, preserving the status quo. It's about defending traditional values. They promote equity, pragmatism, meritocracy. Meritocracy meaning that we should have a society in which people earn what they get, a merit-based society, that you should not receive something because of what your last name is, or whether you're a man or a woman or black, white, Asian, Hispanic, whatever, that you should get in society. That people should be judged based on merit. People should get a job or get into college based on test scores and class rank and GPA, and not on what box you check on the college application in terms of race or ethnicity or what gender you may be. And so we tend to find those folks on the right. They look to the past, right? And we use the word reactionary, that they tend to want to return the country back to a simpler time, and they're conservative in nature. They don't want to interfere with society and social lives of people. Okay, their focus is on the individual and freedom. They want to free the individual. They want the individual to be able to live in freedom, and you can see that in the pendulum drawing that I shared with you on Remind 101. That their focus is on freedom. Their focus is on the individual, and seeing to it that the individual exists in nature free. Their natural rights, that they're able to exercise their natural rights without government interference. Their goal is economic freedom. The most important goal, the most important freedom for a conservative is economic freedom. The belief is that if you do not have economic freedom, then none of your freedoms matter. Your political freedom, that all freedom comes from economic freedom. That if you're not free economically, then your other freedoms, then your other freedoms don't matter. They support employers and free trade. And over here on the progressive side, they believe in equality versus equity. They're more idealistic. They're dreamers, right? They're dreamers. They're pie in the sky. They have an idea what the country and what the world should look like. They're dreamers, and we need to be a country in which we have dreamers. But we also need people who are very pragmatic, who are like, you know what, what you're wishing for, what you're dreaming for, isn't possible. So we have to deal with what we're confronted with in the now. Egalitarianism. They promote egalitarianism, and sometimes in promoting egalitarianism, we cannot have a society based on meritocracy, on merit. That sometimes we have to support people. We have to give people things that they didn't earn because of their race, their sex, their ethnicity, whatever. Okay, where these folks look to the past, the left looks to the future. They're forward thinkers. They look into the future. They're not looking to the past. They're not trying to preserve traditional values. They're progressive. They want to move society forward. They want to make progress. They look to the future. Okay. The right is, like I said, conservative in nature. The left is progressive in nature. Their focus is not on the individual, but society as a whole. Okay. When they talk about making progress, they want society. They put their emphasis on society. They're not into economic freedom. Their goal, they would rather see all Americans live in complete equality and freedom, social freedom, personal freedom. And they believe that that's more important than being employed, than having a paycheck, than having the right to earn a buck in our capitalist system. So their goal is personal freedom, whereas the right supports employers, bosses, businessmen. The left tends to support the workers. Okay, and where conservatives promote free trade, the left promotes fair trade. And so the big difference between the left and the right is that the right tends to promote a policy called laissez-faire, where the government does not interfere with people, with society. The left does. The left interferes with social lives and society in order to promote progressivism, progressive causes. So they promote the status quo. They promote evolving. They want society to evolve. They believe in social progress. When it comes to social progress, they evolve. When it comes to the economy, the right supports a deregulated economy, deregulated businesses and industries, and they do not support high taxes, and they don't like spending a lot of money. And over here on the left, they support a regulated economy. They believe in putting rules and regulations on businesses and industries, and they are more prone to raise taxes and to spend your money. And so just looking at this one portion of this chart, I want to look right over here, the support of workers. We're talking about your blue collar workers, farmers, people who work minimum wage, fair trade, that as we conduct trade around the world, we don't want to get screwed by people, And so, you know who that is right there? That's Donald J. Trump right there. So when Trump was running for president in the Republican primaries, many of the guys that were running against him made the charge that Donald Trump really isn't a conservative Republican. And indeed, to a certain extent, they were right. And that when you look at Donald Trump, he appealed, he had the part of Trump that was very progressive was his support of blue collar workers, coal miners, people who work in factories, who are seeing their jobs being shipped to India and to China and to third world countries. He's not a fair trade guy, or excuse me, he's not a free trade guy, because even in the news last week, they were talking about the potential of the government, the U.S. government, of getting out of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. We've already Trump's administration has already canceled the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He's taken the United States out of the Paris Climate Accords because he feels that those agreements are unfair to workers. He doesn't think it's fair that the United States is getting screwed over. And so if you really want to look at the political spectrum and understanding that somebody can be conservative on some things, but liberal on other things, I mean, just look at our current president. And I would make the argument that that is a big reason why he wins the presidency, because he was able to cross over the political spectrum and get people who normally vote liberal, people who normally vote Democrat, to actually vote for him. And that's what enabled him to win predominant Democrat states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, Michigan, and really helped to secure his job. You know, and then of course you look over here and you can see, you know, Trump, the conservative, and you can see a deregulated economy. Don't tax and spend. So, I mean, you've seen him cut taxes. You've seen him take rules and regulations off businessmen. And you've seen him support economic freedom, where he also supports the employers. So you know, really that's what you, and honestly, guys, you know, that's I think that's a good teachable moment in understanding the left and the right, that it's okay to have certain beliefs that, you know, that from both ends of the spectrum, and I think we see that in our current president. Now, looking at society and culture, okay, looking at society and culture, we've got to look at how the left and the right is wired when it comes to how they see society and culture. Now, I'm not necessarily going to go through all of this. I am going to kind of nitpick and look at this, different parts of it. But you can see their ideas on basic concepts of how they see society and culture. Progressives want to see a very inclusive society, multicultural society, a society that is constantly evolving. They believe that the world can be improved by bringing in the new. So they're very utopian in their thinking. And they believe that community should be based on ethical behavior. Over here on the right, they are exclusive, they're established, they're nationalistic. Okay, they're in terms of flag waving and patriotism and, you know, nationalistic. They believe that community should not be based on ethics but on morals. And you can see where the community based on morals, how it influences the family, the development of the family. Conservative parents tend to be more strict, and they want to instill within their child, they want to build what's called the self-reliant child. That when the child becomes an adult, what can that self-reliant child do? Self-defense. They can defend themselves from the big bad world. They have moral strength and self-discipline. You know, they want to develop, they want to create a child that will succeed, that can compete in the economy and promote individualism. And so they create within the family an atmosphere of reward and punishment. You know, they call it tough love, you know, so build character within the child. And then when he becomes an adult, okay, you have a self-reliant adult. Okay. Now you also see here that where you find these adults are largely in rural or suburban communities. The suburbs, like Bernie, you know, this is where you find it. And so it tends that when these people raise children, these children enter the workforce, and they they largely become policemen. They join the military. They join Wall Street. They become stockbrokers. They become, lawyers and things like that. Businessmen. They start businesses, judges, things like that. Over here on the left, the progressives, when they raise children, of course, they're not the strict parent. They're the nurturing parent. They want to instill morals, right and wrong within the child. The education, when it comes to education, they want to create within the child someone who asks questions, someone who can relate and cooperate with others. And so they want to create a self-nurturing child. And the relationship between the parents and the child is a relationship is built on respect and trust. Whereas the relationship between, over here on the right, between the parents and the child, that relationship is built on respect and fear. And so I can tell you just from personal experience, when I was growing up, I was a parent pleaser. And, I respected and feared my parents. I was afraid of getting in trouble. I was always wanting their approval. And I don't apologize for that. I think that being raised like that enabled me to become successful later on. But I look over here, and there's times which I wish that the relationship I had with my parents was, that I didn't really fear them, and that I was able to build that relationship on respect and trust. But at the end of the day, they both lead to good things. We're not judging how parents raise their kids. We'll let other people do that. But over here on the left, the self-nurturing child is able to go into a world. They're taught to be open, to have empathy for people, and self-examination. And this creates potential within the child. And so when they enter adulthood, the goal is to create a fulfilled adult. They largely live in urban settings. And these are the people that go into the media. They become things like architects, professors, scientists, and teachers, And so moving on. So ultimately, like I said, I'm not going to go over the whole thing. This will address, and you can read through it, that, what defines conservatives versus progressives in terms of their beliefs over certain moral issues. You see them over here. Okay, gay rights, abortion rights, war, tax cuts, same-sex marriage, God, unmarried sex, all those. Their ideas about freedom versus equality, where one seeks to control immigration and these seek to protect minorities. Down here, you can see that, as voters, progressive voters tend to vote for fairness, helping those who cannot help themselves, positive role models and champions of the downtrodden. They tend to be more pacifist, anti-war, whereas progressive or conservatives, when they vote, they support upholding order, helping those who help themselves, strong role models, champions of opportunity, and they're more militant. They're more they support strong military. They tend to support more. They tend to be more supportive of war and the use of the military around the world. And so, but this is it. And my goal today is for you to understand, when studying the left versus the right, that no matter where you find yourself on the political spectrum, to see the value in the other side. There's a great value. We just can't be a nation of right-wing conservative nationalists. We can't. We've got to have these people to bring balance to the country. There's times in American history, and this is where we're getting to the pendulum. So if you will pull out that sheet of paper, or if you'll actually pull out that image that I sent you, when you look at the pendulum, that what we find is that we have these pendulum swings, these times in which the we have these pendulum swings where we have these time periods where these people are in power, and we have times in which these people are in power. There's times in which we have conservative government versus times in which we have progressive government. And I want you to understand what happens to cause the swings. And as we go through the rest of this course, as we go through the rest of the APUSH course, I want you to understand the pendulum shifts and what causes the pendulum shifts. So if you look at that image that I gave you, and B-Day, when you get to class, I will actually have a copy of this for you so you can have with you. So if you look on the right side of the pendulum, if you think of the pendulum as, you see like a grandfather clock, where you have these swings back and forth. We have these periods of time in American history in which conservatives, who are the conservatives? They're people who believe in laissez-faire, small, limited government. They believe that, that the more limited the government is, the more free people are. Now, ultimately, I will say this about the conservative, about human nature. People, by nature, want to be left alone. They want to be free. They want to be left alone. They don't want to be told what to do. People are at their best when they're left alone. Okay? People are at their best when they're left alone. Okay? They don't like it when people tell them what to do. And I can tell you that, as a teacher, I feel like one of the major reasons why my kids year in and year out are successful is because the administrators, my boss, whether it was Mr. Stelmashevsky or Dr. Spohr or Mr. Ashley, they leave me alone. They let me do my thing. They don't try to micromanage what I do in the classroom. When you leave people alone and you allow them to operate in nature without any restraints, people are at their best. They're more creative, they're more productive, and they're able to accomplish what they set out to accomplish when they're left alone. And that's what the conservatives promote. They promote freedom. They believe that Americans are at their best when government is small, it's limited, laissez-faire, people are left alone. Now, this isn't good. Now, this is good. This is what people prefer. I mean, I would even argue that even liberals want to be left alone. They don't want to be told what to do. They want to be given time. They want to be given freedom to create, freedom to be productive. And ultimately, as human beings, we want to make our own rules and we want to live our lives according to what we want. The problem with conservatives, okay, and this is something you need to know, conservatives, is that when you leave people alone, you give freedom to people, okay, it leads to corruption. It leads to corruption. What happens when you give freedom to a criminal? What happens when you give freedom to a crook? And believe me, there's all kinds of crooks. We've got your crooks that, they stand in the alleyway and they're standing there with the billy club and they're ready to take everything you have, okay? And you've got crooks that wear coats and ties and carry briefcases, and they sit in boardrooms and they sit in City Hall and they sit on Wall Street, and you got crooks everywhere. I mean, so what happens when you give freedom to crooks? Well, they hurt people. They create victims. They abuse people, and they exploit. And so what happens is that Americans they want to be free. They want to be left alone, but they understand that if you give freedom to crooks, they're going to use that freedom and they're going to become corrupt. They're going to exploit people. They're going to hurt people. They're going to victimize people. And so people, human beings, are willing to accept only so much corruption, right? And eventually there's always going to be a tipping point. And when Americans feel like there's just simply too much corruption, they will put progressives into office. Okay, we'll have a pendulum shift. And the people who actually cause the pendulum shift are the moderates, are those people on the political spectrum who are right in the middle, who, you know, have some conservative components and some progressive opponents. Conservatives are normally, according to political scientists say that conservatives are always going to vote conservative, regardless of how good or how bad things are. Progressives are always going to vote progressive, no matter how good or bad things are. It's the moderates, the people in the middle, it's the people in the center. Political scientists call these people swing voters because they cause the pendulum to swing. They're the ones who will determine who are elected, you know, county judge, sheriff, governor, congressman, president of the United States. It's the moderates that really move the pendulum. Now, if the moderates believe that there's just simply too much corruption, they'll put the progressives in power. Because if you look at the chart here, what do the progressives promote? Look at the top left-hand corner. They promote social and economic justice. Okay? Justice for who? The victims, the people who've been exploited, the people who've been abused by the corrupted people. So they promote social and economic justice for the victims. And justice goes two ways. You got justice for the victims, but justice is also for the evildoers. I mean, so the evildoers, I mean, like I said, justice goes two ways, for the victims and for the evildoers. Now, as progressives do their business, as they go about the, you know, the important duty of administering social and economic justice, okay, what does that look like? Two things. Number one, what we have when you promote social and economic justice, it usually involves increasing the size of government. You have a large active government in both the economy and society. And so the larger government gets, the less freedom people have. Okay, so what happens when progressives and liberals do what they do, individuals usually experience a loss of freedom. People experience a loss of freedom. Okay, people's freedoms are being restricted. And what did I tell you that all Americans, all people want? All people want to be left alone. All people want to be free to create, free to prosper. You know, people want to make their own rules. And people, by and large, do not, they take it very personally when their freedom is being restricted. Now, I will say this. People do not mind giving up freedom if they know it's going to lead to social and economic justice. You know, I don't mind paying my taxes if I know that my tax dollars are going to fund public education, or they're going to support the U.S. military or something. You know, I don't mind giving up economic freedom or social freedom if I know it's helping someone else, you know. So people are willing to give up freedom in the name of justice, okay? And, you know, after 9/11, people lost a lot of freedom. You know, now every time you pick up the phone and you call, you know, you get on the phone and you make a phone call, you know, the government now has sweeping powers to snoop and listen in on phone calls. They can, without you knowing, there's definitely been a loss of privacy. They could find out, you know, what books you're checking out at the library, what websites you're going to. You go to the airports and you go through body scans, you get patted down, you got to take your shoes off. I mean, 9/11 resulted in a loss of freedom. And people, Americans they're willing to give up a little freedom if they know that it might lead to preventing other 9/11s. So really, I want to get back to the whole idea, and I'm almost done here. I want to get back to the whole idea that both progressives and conservatives are very valuable. We got to have them both. There's times in which we need the government to be small and limited, in which Americans need to be free. We don't want to be restricted. There's the times in which we need the conservatives to be in power. And there's times in which we need the progressives to be in power, to right some wrongs and to provide some justice. Okay. But where the progressives always go wrong, again, it's like the thing with conservative government is that it always leads to corruption. Okay? And that causes the pendulum shift. Well, what causes the pendulum to shift back is when Americans feel like too much freedom has been restricted, that the progressives have gone too far in making government big and large, and admit that in their quest for social and economic justice, individuals have experienced too much freedom has been taken away. And when people feel like that liberty has been lost, then the moderates will shift government back to the conservatives. So what do the conservatives do? They give you your freedom back. How do they give you your freedom back? By making government small and limited. And so what we have down at the very bottom of that page, you see the different swings in American history, the swings from conservative to progressive. And we start off with the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age is definitely one of these conservative periods. And by the end of the Gilded Age, Americans felt like there's just too much corruption. It's rampant in American business, and American government, and really all throughout society. And so the pendulum shifted in 1901 to the progressive era, and then the progressives at the turn of the century, they went way too far. You know what they did? They got us involved in World War I, which is a very idealistic war, which really had very little to do with the United States. But the big sin that the progressives were guilty of is prohibition. They took away alcohol, and that was unacceptable. And so in 1920, the conservatives are put back in power. That's what we call the Roaring Twenties. And what do you think the corruption is there? What did the policies of the Roaring Twenties lead to? The Great Depression. And so the Great Depression swung the pendulum to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And so under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we not only do we have the New Deal, but we also have World War II. In World War II, the government got really large and really active and really, that's it. And so after World War II is over, the pendulum swung in the 1950s back to conservatism. That's Dwight David Eisenhower. And then after Eisenhower, the pendulum swung to John F. Kennedy and LBJ. That's the 1960s. And by 1968, Americans were essentially fed up with the anti-war people and all the civil rights movement and all the different rights revolutions going on. They elect Nixon. And what do you think the corruption was there? What caused the pendulum to shift with Nixon? And if you guessed the Watergate scandal, then you are correct. And so after Nixon and Ford, the pendulum shifted to Carter, Jimmy Carter in 1976. And then in 1980, the pendulum shifted to Reagan. Of course, the 1980s is a conservative time period. We have 12 years of Reagan-Bush. And after 12 years of Reagan-Bush, we got Clinton. And you think of the corruption there with Clinton? The Monica Lewinsky scandal, I was reading yesterday, the Monica Lewinsky scandal has just turned 20 years old. It happened 20 years ago. That's crazy. And so, of course, we had 8 years of Clinton, then the pendulum swung to George W. Bush, and then in 2008, we have President Obama. And in 2016, the election of Donald Trump. So I think one thing you do notice is that the pendulum swings are getting shorter I really attribute a lot of that to just the improvements in information. We're now in an information age. We have social media, and I think our politics is more volatile. The pendulum shifts are more volatile because of the information age. But what I need you to do is, as we go through the remainder of this course, I need you to think about, as we go through these units and as we go through the history, I want you to think about the pendulum. And I want you to think about, conservative government and progressive government and what their goals are and what they're hoping to accomplish. But I also want you to understand what causes the shifts, what ultimately are going to cause shifts between these different eras. Okay, that's a very important historical skill in this course. So thank you for your attention, and I hope to see you the rest of the week.